Hi, my name's Phil and I like talking about politics, and there are three main strands for this in terms of gearing up for a general election. So Boris Johnson has called an emergency cabinet today to discuss trying to get a general election. Jeremy Corbyn has been saying that he would absolutely support a general election, and separately Tony Blair has been saying that Labour should avoid this because it is an elephant trap. So what I'm going to do is discuss all of those and my own thoughts as well. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. So let's start with Tony Blair's statement first of all. And he's described Jeremy Corbyn supporting the idea of a general election as an elephant trap. What does that mean? For those who aren't aware, effectively what it means, well, it's a trap, of course, and we understand what that means in the Labour context. The problem is that Labour are not beasting it in the polls, as any opposition, major opposition party should be doing when we look at the current political mess and the fact that they've been out of power for 9 years now. An elephant trap specifically is a trap that, if you have any acumen at all, you spot. You avoid it. I think originally it comes from chess. I think it's an idea of something that, again, a top level chess player would not fall for, but maybe a more amateur one would. And I think it is. I absolutely think it is. Ultimately, what's causing this is Boris Johnson, first of all, tried the proroguing Parliament gambit. Again, to get back into chess here. I had a really good comment from someone on one of the videos, actually, that it's like both sides playing chess, but they're carving their own pieces as they go along and making the rules up. And it is. So Boris Johnson tried the prorogation last week. As far as we can tell, it may work. We don't know that it won't work at the moment. So he takes out Parliament for 5 weeks, which means he basically only has to keep them quiet for 3 weeks in order to get his no-deal Brexit. 1 week before that and about two and a bit weeks after they would return, to stop them legislating to get out of the no-deal, to get an extension. In other words, because that's what it's down to at the moment. No other outcomes are possible. We either get an extension to whatever end, or we go out with no deal. Seems to be the situation. So Boris Johnson attempted the prorogation. Now, Parliament tomorrow are going to put forward emergency legislation to try and prevent that. Now, I don't know exactly how that's going to be worded. Neither does Boris Johnson, which is why he's panicking at the moment, and Dominic Cummings come to that. So they think that they can get this through. They can introduce it on Tuesday, get it through the Commons on Wednesday. Then they need to get it through the Lords on Thursday. Now, the Lords will, the Brexit supporting Lords, they're in the small minority, but they will attempt to filibuster so it runs out of time. It's certainly going to need another day. Now, I don't know why Parliament also don't just vote to sit on Friday. I don't know whether that's too tricky, because that would be the obvious solution. The Lords can't possibly keep it going long enough. They didn't last time. They tried to filibuster. I don't think they will this time. Because ultimately what you're talking about is finishing it off on Monday and then getting royal assent. Which means the prorogation does nothing. Assuming this legislation definitely, assuming the EU 27 are okay with an extension, means that we get an extension, then his prorogation gambit has failed. Now, Boris Johnson knows this. So what he's done today, emergency cabinet, to go, right, we need a general election then. General election. I don't know how that necessarily helps him if this legislation passes through this week, if I'm honest. I don't know how that helps him. But what it might be is that he knows that he can't stop the extension. So have a general election while he can get the most benefit from it. The situation is this, and I discussed this before, didn't I? If this extension goes through, Boris Johnson is finished. That's all there is to it. He is finished. He has not been able to deliver that Brexit that he promised, do or die, which means, you know, and he can't stop a general election if Parliament is probably up for a general election as long as we get this extension first. So he needs a general election ASAP. His best chance in a general election was before the summer. If he'd have called a snap general election immediately, because remember, all the taunts were there. Lots of people saying, oh, unelected Prime Minister, you know, you should fight a general election. He could have turned around and gone, yeah, all right then. That was his best chance. Absolutely his best chance. You know, the Boris bounce. The problem is now, the longer he leaves it, especially if Parliament does get its way, it's trickier. So what he really wants is he wants a general election ASAP while he's still sounding tough on Brexit to try and get those votes. Or he thinks that's what's in his best interest. Now, I'm not sure whether he thinks he'll win. If he thinks he'll win, I think he's making a mistake. I'm not saying he can't. What I'm saying is, I think the problem at the moment, if either a Labour or a Conservative supporter, as a Labour supporter, look at the Conservatives and think they're unelectable. They're a right mess. They're completely split. They've presided over utter chaos over the last, 9 years, never mind just the last 3 years, but they have over the last 3 years with Brexit. They've created an absolute mess. They are utter, and they're fighting amongst themselves. They're tearing each other to pieces. Unelectable. The problem is, if you're a Conservative supporter, you look at the Labour Party, and for different reasons, you say, well, the same thing's true. In fact, the Conservatives are ahead of Labour in the polls. Goodness knows how. So you also say, well, Labour under Corbyn are unelectable. So it's possible that Boris Johnson's just looking at Labour and think, well, they're unelectable. So, you know, we can form a government because we're the highest in the polls, but it's not going to work like that. For the first time ever, Conservatives may find the first past the post system bites them on the arse. We'll have to see, because this legislation is probably going to go to a vote this week, at least in the Commons. There's a load of Tory MPs now come out and said, well, we'll face deselection then. I was saying at work, it might be ironic if the Conservatives finally realise the benefits of union. Because let's say there's 100 Tory MPs that want to vote through an extension. If they all banded together, like a few bits at a time might think, oh no, I don't want to get deselected. If they all banded together and voted it through, is Boris Johnson going to get rid of 100? Let's say he does. Here's the scenario. First of all, he has no majority at all. Of course, there's then going to be a general election. But second of all, these people could just play the long game. Boris Johnson, if he's finished, if he can't hold on to power, that means someone else comes into power. They just join the Conservative Party again. And even if they're deselected as a general election, that means they're no longer an MP. If there's I'm going to say, if there's a general election anytime soon, I cannot see how it won't be a complete mess. I can't even see two parties together being able to form a majority. I think it's just going to be much like it is in Europe, quite frankly, but we're not used to that system. I've talked about that this weekend. So I think there'd be another general election within a year. If we have one like this month or next month, it'll be next month realistically, won't it? Or the month after. I think we're going to have another general election. We're talking about the fact, we'll have had 3 general elections in the space of like 4 years. We'll have had 4 general elections in the space of 5 years, I think, before we finished it. So those could play the long game. They could say, well, maybe we do get kicked out of the party, but we'll come back in a year later when all this has gone to hell and Johnson's out. So it does sound like there's quite a lot anyway going to stand up for it. So Johnson's failed that. That's why he's gone for the general election. So here's the thing now. He cannot trigger a general election. We have to remember the Fixed Terms Parliament Act, which passed some years ago by the Conservative government, David Cameron's government at the time, means that there's only 2 ways to get an early general election. Either a vote of no confidence, which cannot be resolved within 14 days, automatic general election, or someone calls for a general election and 2/3 of MPs vote in favour of it. Not a simple majority, 2/3. So Boris Johnson can't just order it. He basically needs Jeremy Corbyn. Now, here's the problem. I saw discussed in the BBC News, the political correspondent there saying, well, Jeremy Corbyn's got to support it because he spent so long asking for a general election. It's not strictly true. Yes, he should support it. If Boris Johnson on Wednesday, during Prime Minister's questions, says, I am proposing that we have a snap general election. If I was Jeremy Corbyn, I would say, I'm totally on board with a general election. Tell you what, we'll just make sure we get an extension first, then I'm right on it. What he shouldn't do is say, yeah, fine, well, let's vote for it now. Wait until we're certain that the extension is in place. Then general election. Then a general election. That's what we need to do. Because remember, with a general election, where Parliament doesn't go on a break for a general election. It's dissolved. What that means is there are no MPs in the entire country. Nobody is an MP anymore. There is no Parliament. There's still the government, but they're not MPs anymore. Technically, they're just still the government until a new government replaces them. That's the idea with the Prime Minister. They are the Prime Minister until another Prime Minister replaces them or until they die. We haven't had one of those for a while. So Parliament can then do nothing. It's not an issue of prorogation. For nearly 3 weeks before the date of that general election, there will be no Parliament. And the other thing as well, Boris Johnson might say, yeah, we should have a general election, say, mid-October, which Jeremy Corbyn will go, yeah, that's fantastic. That means we can have a new government in place to make sure we get an extension. But here's the thing. Boris Johnson can say, I think about mid-October, MPs vote for it. And then he, as Prime Minister, can say, actually, no, I've changed my mind. I think we should have it 31st of October. And that's fine. That's totally fine. No problem at all. Easy. I mean, maybe there'll be some little charge about misleading the House. What they're going to do, find him in contempt of Parliament. Theresa May had a couple of them, didn't seem to worry her too much. She got a bit shirty, that was about it. So there's nothing to stop Boris Johnson doing that. What he says in the Commons does not become law. The law says that the Prime Minister determines the date of the general election. That is his power. And you in Parliament have no control over that unless they change the legislation. But then they can't do that if they're going to get this other legislation through this week and Parliament's prorogued the week after. So Boris Johnson basically needs Jeremy Corbyn on board. And he knows he's going to get on board because Jeremy Corbyn, for some reason, thinks that it's a good idea to have a general election, even if we haven't got the extension in place. Now, bear in mind, you know, I have said before, it's quite clear Jeremy Corbyn wants Brexit. He wants the Tories to deliver it. The problem is, if he agrees to the general election and we haven't guaranteed the extension, he will be culpable. And more than that, he will be seen to be culpable for the no-deal Brexit that ensues, if indeed it does. So that what has to happen is he has to make sure that the extension is, at least from our point of view, secure. Obviously, the EU 27 are, you know, everyone gets an equal say in that and it has to be unanimous. But if the EU 27, as was rumoured at the weekend, are in favour of it, then as long as we've secured it from our point of view, then we should be fine. He can do what he wants. I still don't think any party will win. I still think Boris Johnson would even end up in opposition because although I don't think any two parties could form a coalition to form a government, I think the Conservatives would lose seats. And I think that for a number of reasons. First of all, they're doing worse in the polls than they were last time. So that, I mean, remember what I say, you can't really translate vote share into actual number of seats. But it's such a small share, they can't possibly get more seats than they have now. And it will surely be fewer, sorry. Get it right. And then there's the twin problem of the Brexit party up against them. They're going to stand. They're going to stand. I'm convinced of that. And if he deselects a load of heavyweights, I said this yesterday, I think some of those candidates will just stand as an independent with the intention of rejoining the Conservative Party afterwards. Because if they win that seat, then... But they don't even have to win the seat. Because, like, take Ken Clarke, for example. Very pro-European. He's not intending to stand at the next general election. This is his last parliament. But let's say a load of Tory MPs are deselected, himself included. Might he not stand anyway as a way to prevent no deal? He's very well known in his constituency. So even if he doesn't win, he'll be taking votes away from the unknown new Tory candidate that Boris Johnson will handpick. And there'll be plenty of Conservative voters out there who are not at all happy with what Boris Johnson is doing, this dictatorial style. And you can't get much dictatorial than saying, if you vote against the whip, you're out the party. I mean, you're not supposed to vote against the whip an awful lot, although the man behind me did an awful lot. But you don't kick them from the party. In fact, ironically, with Jeremy Corbyn, he was doing it so often when Labour in government. There were people saying to Tony Blair, withdraw the whip, and he said no. he said it's important that we have a broad spectrum within the Labour Party. Something I wish he would get through to his head. You know, there is a broad spectrum of people that vote for Labour in the country, so you have to appeal to that broad spectrum. Bloody hell, do that and stop listening to Len McCluskey, get behind Remain, and maybe Labour have got a chance. Because that's what I'm fearing now. If this general election seems inevitable, and it does, Labour, get on with it. But anyway, before I start going on that, that's probably a topic for another video. Those are my thoughts on the developments for today. Put yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.